It launches the 2019 National Security Strategy document.
Federal Executive Council approves more funds for road projects across the country.
And Senate passes Public Procurement Act Amendment Bill 2019 at Wednesday's plenary.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall discuss the federal government's external borrowing plan.
All right, and of course, precisely maybe last week, President Muhammadu Buhari presented an external loan request of more than $29 billion to the National Assembly. Now, despite growing concerns by Nigerians about that, the government has clarified that its debt to gross domestic product GDP is not only one of the lowest among its peers, but also within an acceptable threshold.
Now, the federal government's plan to borrow an additional 1.92 trillion naira in the year 2020 will take Nigeria's total public debt portfolio to about 27 billion naira, an additional 15.5 billion naira borrowed since the beginning of President Muhammadu Buhari's administration just over 4 years ago.
All right, Kingsley, we know that, of course, the president has, been making this presentation. We remember that in 2016, he equally sought the approval of the National Assembly to also, get some external, borrowing,
right.
Yes, to fund certain fundamental infrastructure. But we do know that request was, approved in partial.
Yeah, in fact, true. Yes, in the 8th Senate. But of course, the president had informed the Senate that the borrowed funds will be used to finance a number of projects across a number of sectors of the Nigerian economy, including agriculture, mining, and several others. But we do know from what the Honorable Minister of Finance has also indicated that the details of the 2020 budget stipulate quite clearly the government's plan to fund the budget with borrowing plus, of course, generating internal revenue.
Okay. Indeed, Kingsley, the argument that people, put forward is that when you borrow, it's a sign of, a kind of challenge. But people have also come out to say that, look, borrowing is not a problem at all, but it is what you do with what you borrow that matters. And of course, government has come out to say, look, we need this money to fund infrastructure. And there are so many infrastructure projects going on in the country. We only saw, just a few days ago, the president, of course, the groundbreaking ceremony of the University of Transportation, although that was a corporate social responsibility. The railway, Lagos-Ibadan railway project is on course. In fact, the Lagos-Kano railway project is also another one. The Second Niger Bridge is on course. So these are fundamental infrastructure projects that government needs to fund.
There's no doubt about that. That's what the government, of course, has outlined. And as you said, typically, some experts will say nothing is wrong with borrowing. And in fact, there is virtually no economy in the world that doesn't have its own debt stock.
It's a financial plan.
That's
part
right.
Of the financial plan.
That's right. That's right. Now, the Debt Management Office, in an updated informational detail said on its website, said Nigeria's debt portfolio rose to about 25 trillion naira at the 30th of June this year. And so with the latest plan to borrow another 1.92 trillion, Nigeria's profile will have risen by over 128%.
All right, Kingsley, and that's, of course, the prompt for our discussion today on Good Morning Nigeria. That's the recent presentation made to the National Assembly for an external borrowing to fund infrastructure. This is Good Morning Nigeria. I am Claire Delapo Abdul-Razak. Thank you for joining us from wherever you're watching. It's Thursday's edition.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague Claire to also welcome you to the program. As usual, we'll have our complimentary segments. This is Good Business, Newspaper Review, and others. In the meantime, let's join our colleague, Comfort Amodu, as she brings us the highlights of the morning news. Good morning, Comfort.
Good morning, Kingsley and Claire. And here's Morning News. Now, a critical compendium charting the best way forward towards restoring security in Nigeria, the Buhari approach has been formally presented to the public. It is the 2019 National Security Strategy produced by the Office of the National Security Advisor. President Muhammadu Buhari, who performed the ceremony, said the document represents a thoughtful, strategic and practical expression of his administration's resolve to make Nigeria safe for all.
I therefore call on all of you gathered here as heads of ministries, departments and agencies to see yourselves as stakeholders and partners in the wondrous task of securing our people and to demonstrate unity of purpose in implementing this strategy.
The core philosophy of this national security strategy is human security. It addresses the current threats faced by the Nigerian nation as well as those threats that are anticipated to emerge in the near future.
The Federal Executive Council has approved about 5 billion naira towards the completion and expansion of various road projects in parts of the country. The Minister of Works and Housing, Babatunde Fashola, made this known while briefing newsmen after the council meeting presided over by President Muhammadu Buhari.
The approval was for the 18-kilometer section that completes the entire length of 26 kilometers of the road. All that was awarded in the previous administration was just 8 kilometers of 26. So what we've done now is to award the 18 kilometers and so that the full stretch of 26 kilometers is now under contract for the purpose of completion.
And a new dawn beckons in the history of the Nigerian Armed Forces Remembrance Day celebration, with the 2020 edition set to introduce innovations.
Tribute to our troops is a one-day event billed to hold on the 11th of January 2020 and is going to be in 3 phases. Phase 1 will be conducted by celebrities outside Abuja. Phase 2 involves hosting of fallen soldiers, widows, and children, while the third phase is a dusk-to-dawn star-studded performance at the Moshood Abiola Stadium here in Abuja.
Meanwhile, a strong anti-kidnapping and robbery squad of the Nigerian police forces combing the forest around Robochi community and its environs in Abuja following the spate of kidnapping in the community. FCT Commissioner of Police Bala Chiroma, who is coordinating the operation, advised the operatives to adhere strictly to rules of engagement.
Sunday, then they now release us, telling us that we should bring money. If only we do not bring the money, they will kill us. Or that they will free me and then they will kill my brother. The other Fulani man, they broke his head.
Is to prevent criminals from operating freely within FCT, armed robbers, kidnappers, and what have you. We intend to checkmate them.
Steering and technical committees on goal reference infrastructure and demographic data development have been inaugurated by Vice President Jemi Oshbajo. The committees are to oversee the project nationally and determine strategic and technical priorities.
Long-term goals is to develop and promote examples of data use on health, education, agriculture, as well as water resources. Secondly, we are also looking at supporting planned national population and housing census activities.
Geospatial data of the scope and depth that is envisaged by this project is obviously important for all of our development objectives and all of our development ambitions. But perhaps we may need to involve the governors, because obviously for most of the human capacity development issues and initiatives, the subnationals are the most crucial.
Now, no nation can experience socio-economic transformation with a cumbersome public procurement process. Taking cognizance of this, the Senate embarked on the amendment of Nigeria's Public Procurement Act aimed at reducing bottlenecks and to ensure timely completion of projects.
Institution of e-procurement model through the deployment of information communication technology in order to curtail partial interference in the procurement system in accordance with the global best practices.
Minimum easy processes that can easily be accomplished in order to fast-track the procurement process.
Then we should have a time frame, a date to which maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
With this amendment, the procurement process will be faster, and therefore the budget implementation will be faster and better.
Meanwhile, the House of Representatives Wednesday took steps forward in keeping with its resolve to pass the 2020 appropriation bill in the next couple of days. The House Appropriation Committee laid at plenary a report on the 2020 budget.
A bill for an act to authorize the issue from the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the Federation the total sum of 10,594,362,364,830 naira only.
The law establishing them stipulates that they must all be at the ports and borders. Many people are dying based on substandard products. This thing is as a result of fake drugs, substandard goods that are being brought into the country.
It's a major problem, Mr. Speaker. We're a country of about 200 million people.
Any good that will be imported to Nigeria will be ascertained from the origin, whether it's quality enough for Nigeria consumption.
And those are the news highlights for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Kingsley and Claire after this break. I'm Comfort Amodu. Good morning.
Hey, bro, what's up, man?
Wait. Sure, son, I want device to carry.
Enjoy more data than before on Airtel Home Broadband. Get up to 160 gigabytes on routers with 25,000 naira and 55 gigabytes on Airtel MiFi's with 12,000 naira. More data, more you. Reliable home broadband by Airtel,
the smartphone network. 20 years of travel and counting. 20 years of promoting tourism in Africa and diaspora. Over 3 million kilometers traveled. Over 30 African countries visited. Explored the diaspora in 4 continents. Connected over 100,000 happy tourists to Africa. Reached over 50 million homes. Igniting smiles across Africa and beyond. As Goge Africa turns 20, we thank you and invite you to join us in the quest for 20 must-visit destinations in partnerships with the largest TV network in Africa, the NTA, Ministry of Information and Culture, Ministry of Transportation, Studio 24, Delta Airline, Toll Brokers International. You too can still be a partner. Call the numbers on your screen or info@gogeafrica.tv. Goge Africa, celebrating 2 decades of heritage, travel and tourism.
Not so fast. Look, I'm tired. I want to check out of this country for greener pastures.
Just calm down for a moment. Please sit down. Do you have a job where you're going to?
No, but someone is arranging,
Listen, Aliko. Checking out of this country without proper planning means one thing. Unimaginable begin. You know, I've been in the diaspora, but legitimately doing great things at home and abroad. As I've been saying, without the proper footing abroad, the risk is not worth it.
Listen, Alinko, it's better to be home than be trapped abroad or even end up in prison.
My name is Yemi Adetunji, the COO downstream of NNPC. Ever since the closure of the borders, we have seen a marked reduction by 10% in terms of the evacuation of what you call loadouts of PMS, which equates to about 6 million liters per day, essentially because of the border closure, because of certain aspects we've also done as NNPC, working with our sister organizations, sister agencies, Nigerian Customs, DPR, Federal Ministry of Petroleum Resources, and other agencies, and also what we call Operation White, which is an intervention we have put in place to trace and track a molecule of petroleum products as they arrive in country through the vessels, as they move through the depots, and as they are evacuated with trucks out of the depots.
All right, let's take a look at what's trending in the business world as we join our business desk for business news.
In line with federal government's continued quest to diversify the economy as well as provide the much-needed employment for the growing population, the National Bureau of Statistics has launched its fourth Wave General Household 2018 to 2019 Survey Panel Report. Is a model that assists in understanding how agriculture may impact household welfare as well as add to the human and physical capital of households with a view of reducing poverty.
These results will no doubt provide a rich and valuable source of information to support government's efforts along this line. It will also help investors and operators within the agricultural sector with information that supports their work.
What's unique about this one, it's interviewed the same households over time, 4 times now, over a period of 10 years. So actually that gives you a different lens and perspective on, okay, how have households, how have they fared over time? And that too is very important and can help government figure out how to help households get an upward trajectory out of poverty.
Also, as major contributors to the nation's economy, the Nigerian Export Promotion Council is strategizing on ways to complement government's efforts of diversifying the economy via partnership. The Nigerian Export Promotion Council emphasized that the partnership it enjoys from international organizations and developed countries, especially UK, can increase the trade volume from $3.7 billion to $4.5 billion.
To achieve this requires implementation of programs that improve trade competitiveness and ease of doing business between the two countries. There is therefore a strong opportunity for Nigeria to diversify its export base to the UK. The Nigerian Promotion Council are taking cognizance of this inherent potential, aligning and directing its programs and activities.
And just 3 months into the border closure, local sugar industries are set to be breaking even. The Executive Secretary of the National Sugar Development Council, Lateef Busari, says the sugar sector has been a major beneficiary of the border closure by the federal government.
We got to a point where Nigerians are smuggling in, foreign sugar and putting it in local brands bag. A lot of our operators couldn't push out especially the refinery operators who are producing all the sugar, the refined sugar that we consume currently, couldn't push out, their products, principally because a lot of the markets been taken over by smuggled sugar through borders.
The 10-year National Sugar Master Plan, among other objectives, seeks to raise the bar of local production from between 1.5 million to 1.7 million metric tons annually. And next is the closing figures of trade on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange.
Many thanks there, Tamodo, for the business package. Next for us is a review of the papers we have this morning.
This is Good Morning Nigeria, and Bayo Atoyebe is right here with us. Bayo?
Yes. Good morning.
To see, did I catch on our way?
Yes. Good morning.
Sorry. All right.
Of God.
Of God. Yes. And he startled. It's okay.
Yeah, I think you.
Okay, let me start with the Daily Trust. And it's quite busy this morning with, of course, picture stories and headlines. But let's take the lead story. Ex-governor's mum as court orders recovery of pensions. Ex-governor's mum as court orders recovery of pensions. It comes with a rider. We are studying the ruling, according to FG. And who are the ex-governors? A picture of some of them you can find right there. And these are the faces of some of the ex-governors and, of course, ministers. All right. Just a little below the nameplate, you find Senate committee increases 2020 budget by 450 billion naira. The details of that is on page 8. IPPIS, federal government gives lecturers Friday deadline. Read up the details on page 7. And bandits kill 8 kidnapped district head and 6 others in Niger. Okay, let's look at trending stories at the foot of the paper. Edo Assembly declares 14 members elect seats vacant. Page 13. And ethnicity shouldn't determine Buhari's successor, coming from Korocha, Senator Korocha now. Details of that on page 14. And constitutional amendment begins January, and that's coming from the President of the Senate, Ahmed Lawan, page 16.
All right. We'll also take a look now at the front page of the Punch newspaper. Above the nameplate, so we just take it from top to bottom. NNPC, DPR, and FIRS illegally deducted 1.5 trillion naira, and that's attributed to the Director General of the Federation, with details on page 30. Now, federal government treating judiciary with disdain by disobeying orders, that's according to Professor Wole Soyinka. Court orders AGF, that's Attorney General of the Federation, to recover 40 billion naira pension from ex-governors. That's the story Claire read from the Tribune. That's on page 43. Ganduje's new Emirates bill divides Kano Assembly. Details on page 13 as well. Now, 2 episodes there beside the nameplate of the Punch. Nigeria's public finances increasingly fragile, says Moody's. PPIS, that's the kicker. ASU members sneak to register. Enrollment hits 937,000. ASU members sneak to register, and enrollment hits 937,000. Now, the lead story comes with a kicker. Almajiri time bomb. NSA raises fresh concern. ACF leader knocks governors. That story is in clear detail on page 2, but there's a quote there taken from the National Security Advisor, and it reads, "This Almajiri phenomenon, which we have been talking about, cannot continue to, there should be sweep it under the carpet. Eventually, it will come back to bite us on the butt big time." Details are said on page 2. Now, 2 composite photographs on the front page of the Punch there. They have the caption, "Members of the People's Democratic Party during a protest on the killing of the PDP women's leader, Mrs. Salome Abu, during the Kogi governorship election." Protesters were at the entrance of the National Human Rights Commission in Abuja, and that was yesterday. EFCC arrests Mama Boko Haram for alleged 66 million naira fraud. Bandits attack Niger district head, kill 11, abduct 6. Kajuru killings, Adara leaders petition El-Rufai, oppose market reopening. Ghanaians shot 1,000 Nigerian shops over border closure. That's attributed to the envoy. Details on page 42. Gas explosion rocks Lagos Hotel in just 7. Bio.
Well, let's start with the human interest story. That gas explosion, this happened in the Victoria Island, and the accident was just probably due to carelessness. Some welders were working, not knowing that their pipe was leaking, and that was what led to the explosion. Fortunately or unfortunately, there are no deaths reported, but about 3 persons were injured. Some cars were damaged, and the glass in some windows were also damaged. Now, the issue of IPs, you will recall that the registration on the IP started and it will end on December 7th. And federal government has announced that failure to register will mean no salary. However, with 1 day to go, 2 days to go specifically, the academic staff union have raised pertinent questions that if all federal agencies or anybody who draw remuneration from the public cover should register, why are the central bank, the NMPC, the Federal Inland Revenue Service, and the Security Exchange Commission not also being forced to register on the IPPIS? That is food for thought. The Federal Executive Council yesterday met, and the National Security document was also launched. The emphasis seems to be on BAC, that is banditry, armed robbery, and kidnapping. But the National Security Advisor has raised the alarm about the time bomb waiting to detonate, and that is the challenge with the Almajiri. An idle hand, they say, is a devil's workshop. So the earlier we tackle that, we will save ourselves the danger of having it explode in our face. Other approvals at that council yesterday was the purchase of vaccines to enhance animal husbandry across the nation, as well as the Federal Executive approval of the construction of an 18-kilometer road linking Ajasepo of Anerele to Osun State. Their contract was awarded several years ago, but only 8 kilometers was constructed. That is 8 kilometers from the Ajasepo end. And therefore, this award is for the 18 kilometers that will end in Erenle. It may be recalled that that road has been left abandoned for a long time. It was last worked on during the First Republic. In fact, during the era of David Jemibewan as governor of Western Nigeria, attention was drawn to the road, and he said, why do you want me to repair a road that has the least record of accidents in Nigeria? And so the road has been like that for a long time. So this is so-called now coming from people in that area. Now to the matter of the day. Pension, governor's pension. The Federal High Court in Lagos...
Bayo, I'm sorry, just before you get into the federal pension, you were talking about IPPIS and the question that has arisen as to why CBN, NNPC, and FRS are not on the platform yet.
That's the question raised by ASU.
That's the question raised by ASU. Now, Olufeyitin Olusegun, who is the director of IPPIS, he was our guest on Good Morning Nigeria last week. Now, he's quoted here in the Punch newspaper at page 2, as explaining as follows, and I just take part of it so that is clear to, it says, the government knows that all agencies cannot be brought on the drawing board, that's to say on the platform, at the same time. But for those who draw their salaries and personnel costs from the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the federal government, they must come on the platform. Now, for the CBN, FRS, and NNPC, they are revenue agencies and they live on cost of collection. They are revenue agencies and they don't draw from the Consolidated Revenue Fund. So it is left to the government on what to do next, but it's a journey that has just started.
So questions asked, answers given.
So because they did not draw from the Consolidated
Revenue Fund, yes. That's what it said. All right.
Now at the courts now. The Federal High Court sitting in Lagos, presided over by Justice Oluremi Oguntoyibo, has directed the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice to challenge the legality of the state's pensions law permitting ex-governors and other political officers to collect such pensions. The ruling was sequel to an application for an order of mandamus, of compulsion by SERAP to cause that such action be taken. Well, the observation from this is that these are in conflict with powers of the Attorney General of the Federation. Section 174 will be in conflict with that of the Attorney Generals of the state provided for in Section 211. Also, if you go to the Section 100, which allows state assemblies to also make laws, and if you recall, all these pensions were approved by state legislature, so in context of the law, they might appear to have been very much in order. But if we are to go by financial regulation, public officers are not as allowed to make double drawals for perquisite or remuneration onto public coffers. Therefore, the best example you can have is that Major General Buhari is a retired Major General. While he was a retired Major General, he had the option of taking the perquisite as a retired Major General or as a former head of state. Now that he has been elected president from May 29, when he's drawing salary as president, he cannot take, and he is not taking, the salary of a retired Major General. Therefore, it is sad that we have state governors who are doing that. However, indications are that some former governors, including Dr. Chris Babatunde Fashola, have indicated that they have never taken such monies. The question now arises, what becomes of the situation now when there is a law backing the action they took and there is a directive that should be looked into? Maybe the courts will have to decide if the Attorney General decides to take it up in the court as ordered by the Federal Court in Lagos.
Well, Kingsley, I don't know, but let's quickly take...
Kingsley?
No, we're not taking the editorial just yet. I mean, this, as Bayo said, this is a major issue. I mean, so you saw the story online yesterday, after the Federal High Court in Lagos, Ikoyi in Lagos, gave his decision on the action brought by SERAP. You know, it's a matter that has come up on Good Morning Nigeria at various times. Quite aside from the humongous amounts that have been approved, almost, you know, unconscionably by a number of state houses of assembly to former governors and deputies and so on and so forth. After they have served 8 years in office, in contrast distinction to persons who work in the public service and retire after 35 years. It is the details of the benefits that often cause the challenge. You have a house in the state capital, you have another house in Abuja, you have two cars that change every 3 or 4 years, you have a retinue of domestic staff, your medical bills are picked up after you have served for 8 years. Your medical bills not just for yourself, but for your spouse and other members of your family. Which state government can afford that, or what is the opportunity cost of paying such monies? Now, the decision by the Federal High Court is significant on 2 grounds. The order of mandamus compelling the Attorney General of the Federation to seek legal interpretation as to the validity of those state laws, because it is not just the fact that the State House of Assembly has powers to pass such laws, but such laws must be measured against what we now refer to as our pension jurisprudence. In other words, what amount of pension can a State House of Assembly grant, and to whom? I think that those are the core issues that we are seeing here. Plus the fact that, okay, you have seen it in the past, there are persons who have retired from service and have become political appointees. Yes. Now, on retirement, they get their pension. As political appointees, they also get, they get paid. The issue that would now arise is in terms of the pension jurisprudence. Now that we have made a shift, into what is now part of the contributory pension, are you going to deny a person who has contributed to his own pension from the benefits of his pension when he's on retirement, and he now gets what we refer to as a second job, say a political appointment? But if you're a state governor, deputy governor, you don't have contributory pension, you don't contribute to any pension. This is just, as Nigerians would say, it's a woof. It's a woof, that comes.
Let's quickly, we don't have much time.
This is very important. By way of statistics, as at the last count, 22 states have such laws. And some of the perquisites, if might interest you, including, for instance, let's go by this for example, 10 million naira monthly allowance, pension gratuity, and also 2 vehicles, 2 persons, 2 personal drivers, 2 vehicles, a house in Zamfara, a 4-bedroom flat, and also medical treatment for the governor, his family, if possible, abroad.
And some states have more than one
periodic vacation abroad.
That law has been struck down.
Let's look at the editorial quickly, Bayo. We have the editorial, and of course we know that is on Sex Offenders Register, which has been generating quite interesting conversation. But it has also drawn the attention of the Daily Sun, and the Daily Sun's concern is that to succeed in this war, that 25 states states that have not adopted, the act, which was, which came up in 2015, to do so without further delay. That's precisely what this editorial is all about.
Yes, the editorial is drawing the attention of the world and Nigeria too, that all over, particularly 2 million women get raped annually. This was the information that was brought to the fore by the Minister of Women Affairs, and therefore they are encouraging the 22 states that have not adopted that law to make haste to adopt it. But what one finds as a discomfiture is that in recent times, hardly any week passes without report of one old man raping a 3-year-old girl or some infants. What has happened? What is becoming of us? So much so that rape has become a commonplace thing. And I think one of the positive developments is that register that will be domiciled at NAPIB. And if one is to go by example, there is a list of pedophiles around the world. There's a pedophile who escaped in England and ran away to Australia. But because there was a register, after several years, he was traced, arrested, and brought to justice. So that register will go a long way in helping to at least name and shame those who indulge in such acts.
All right, Bayo, thank you.
Thank you too.
We can't take more review of the stories today, but we do thank you, and then we'll see you tomorrow, Friday. I would be here. You will be here. All right. So enjoy your weekend. This is Good Morning Nigeria. We'll be right back to, of course, commence our conversation on Nigeria's external loan borrowing. Don't go away.
They swore an oath to serve our fatherland and defend the people. They traded their freedom, comfortable homes, and mortgaged their lives on the battleground for our unity and peaceful living. These are the great, fearless, loyal, and committed Nigerian armed forces who risked their lives courageously to safeguard our borders. But in the line of duty, men never returned. Nigerians, arise, let's celebrate our fallen heroes. Put on the remembrance emblem with pride to support the incapacitated and families of our fallen heroes.
Indeed, honorable memory of the gallant hearts of young men who paid the supreme sacrifice to keep the country united.
President Muhammadu Buhari enjoins all ministries, parastatals, religious and corporate bodies to donate generously to the Emblem Appeal Launch. Send your donations to these accounts. Account name, Emblem Appeal Launch. Account number 393-200-7526. EcoBank Nigeria PLC.
My name is Balawunti. I'm the Managing Director of Petroleum Product Marketing Company, a subsidiary of NNPC. There's a significant price discrepancy between Nigeria and its neighbors across Africa. There's a discrepancy of between 150 to 250 naira. That creates an incentive for arbitrage, whereby smuggling triumphed by taking petroleum products across the neighbors so that they can be sold at higher price. While the smugglers are making the money, Nigeria is paying for it. And that payment is distorting everything that we do in terms of planning, in terms of our ability to fund, and thereby taking money that is meant for development. The introduction of this Operation White will have production of close to 6 million liters on a daily basis, which if you take an average of 150, translate to a saving of over 1 billion naira every day. That is the benefit of Operation White, and we have started seeing the great benefit.
Meet the dreamer. Meet the stylish. Meet the bold. Meet the inquisitive. Meet the warrior. Meet the master. Meet the realist. The challenge is coming. Unity Challenge. Power, development, and peace. Coming soon.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. As we indicated at the commencement of the program, today our conversation segment focuses on the federal government's external borrowing plan. Before we start, here is the background I put together by our correspondent, Victor.
As at 2015, Nigeria's total domestic debt portfolio was about 8.4 trillion naira, while states' domestic debts stood at about 1.7 trillion naira. The external debt stock of the federal and state governments was about 2.03 trillion naira, out of which the federal government accounts for 79%, totaling about 20.4 trillion naira of the 25.7 trillion naira. This consists of external 7.02 trillion naira and domestic 13.97 trillion naira. This has, however, over the years led to growing concerns by Nigerians. The federal government explains that its debt over GDP is within a manageable threshold and one of the lowest among countries of similar stature. There are now plans to borrow a fresh 1.92 trillion naira. In the 2020 appropriation bill presented to the National Assembly, President Muhammadu Buhari hinted the Senate that the borrowed funds will be used to finance 39 emergency projects in the power, agriculture, transportation and mining sectors of the economy. During the public presentation of details of the budget, the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, had indicated that the money will be borrowed from both domestic and external sources. 745 billion naira is to be expected from domestic lenders, while about 850 billion naira will come from foreign borrowing. The minister added that the additional borrowing was designed to help government finance part of the over 2.2 trillion naira deficit in the 2020 budget, which includes project-tied loans by government-owned enterprises. Is borrowing in itself a problem? What is the implication of the proposed new loans for Nigeria's economy, considering the plans of government? These are some of the questions that guests will attempt to answer on Good Morning Nigeria today.
Thanks to you, Victor, also for that background. Very pertinent question you have asked. But let's get on with our conversation and introduce our guests. First of all, let's start with Zainab Ahmed, who is the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning. Thank you very much, Ajia, for joining us.
Good morning and good morning, Nigeria.
And we have next with us Eka Kengo, a familiar face with us. He's a development economist and former World Bank consultant. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, Nigeria.
Yes,
all right, we're going to be joined also vast in the course of the conversation by another regular guest on Good Morning Nigeria, Professor Ken Ife, who of course will be joining us from Owerri, and also via Skype this time from Uyo will be Ajuri Ngelale, who is senior assistant to the President on Public Affairs. But of course, we're going to kick off the conversation with the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed. Of course, we listened to the backgrounder by our correspondent, but tell us, what is the new borrowing plan all about for some $30 billion US?
Well, thank you very much. The new borrowing plan is for $22.7 billion US, not 30.
Okay. 22.7?
Yes, 22.7.
So where have we been getting
in 2016, the borrowing plan of 2016-2018 3-year period was submitted to the Parliament for 30 billion. So out of that 30 billion, the 8th National Assembly approved some of the loans, and the rest that are not approved are the ones that we are resubmitting now. Broadly speaking, everybody knows that we had some challenges when this administration took over in 2015. That challenge saw us going into recession. When we designed the ERGP, it was designed to take us out of recession and set us back on the path of growth. The ERGP designed that we will do this by borrowing to build out critical infrastructure that are necessary to lay the foundation for growth. This borrowing plan includes railways for Lagos to Kano. It includes the coastal rail from Port Harcourt. The rail will be linking the coastal lines. It also includes transmission projects. It includes the Mambila Power Project. Of the 22.7 billion, 18.1 of that amount is for this major national project. There are also some economic value projects that are added. There are some projects that are meant to support the states. So the borrowing plan is for both the federal government as well as the state governments. We have currently very low revenues. This is largely from the lower prices of crude oil compared to what was obtainable in subsequent years. So it's either we borrow low cost, long-term loans and build critical infrastructure now to lay the basis for the growth of the economy, to improve the ease of doing business, and also enable even small and medium enterprises to grow, to increase their productivity so that they can pay taxes subsequently to government. Or we wait, we do nothing and just use our revenues to pay salaries and carry out recurrent expenditure. We need these investments now, not later. Otherwise, we will not reach our growth aspirations of 7%.
Nigerians when it comes to money and borrowing, Nigerians are very apprehensive, and we want to look at what we have, what are we borrowing, and what might be the impact in future. So I'd just like for you to start by also telling us what is our present, because we find quite a number of figures. You've just corrected us now that what we're looking at is not this. So what is our current, public debt profile?
Right now, the last report that we released, half year 2019, is 25.7 trillion naira. This amount represents 18.99% of debt to GDP. And I've said consistently that the debt levels we have in this country is low, very low compared to countries that are at the same level with Nigeria. What we have is a revenue challenge. When our revenues are underperforming at the rate of 55-58%, the problem is we're not generating sufficient revenue to service government as well as to service debt. So what we're doing in this administration is to address that revenue challenge. We need to grow this economy by building out major infrastructure to enable the whole of government and business to grow. And we need to do it now. This borrowing plan is for 3 years. So it's not going to be borrowed in 1 year. And it's also at various stages of negotiation. But because our laws require that you have to have Parliament approval, we do this at a 3-year stretch. And this is something that has been in the Assembly from 2016. But the projects remain relevant and they're important. That's why we resubmitted the ones that were not passed by the previous Parliament.
When you say, debt ratio profile is low compared to our peers, what exactly do you mean? Let's have an understanding in terms of burden on the people.
On the Nigerian people?
Yes, please.
Well, the burden for us is that because the revenues are low, the debt service to revenue ratios are high. We are currently now at about 54%, which means when you generate revenue, 54% of that revenue is used to service debt. So, but if we're able to, from the budgets that we plan, if we're able to raise the revenues that we plan, our debt to our revenue to debt service ratio will be as low as 30%, and that is healthy by any standard. So what we all have to do in government is collectively look at how to enhance revenue, and that's one of the reasons why we sent a finance bill to the National Assembly. The finance bill has about 96 adjustments of 7 different acts. Most of it is to reduce taxes for small, medium enterprises, even remove taxes in some cases, remove some ambiguities in the laws and some loopholes, just to make it easy for businesses to operate in the country. We believe that the way to increase taxes is to enhance business so that there will be more productivity, there will be more employment, and then this businesses can now contribute in terms of paying taxes.
Okay, Honorable Minister, I would like you to back up again and, restate your opening remarks with regard to the entire philosophy, if you like, of the new borrowing plan or the revised borrowing plan. You indicated that the federal government is not seeking to borrow 30 billion US dollars anew, nearly 30. But that federal government now, through President Muhammadu Buhari, has tabled before the Senate a borrowing plan for $22.7 billion. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that this is not new. Is that also correct? That this dates back to 2016. Is that correct? And that the Senate or the National Assembly had previously approved part of this borrowing plan. That's also correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that $18.1 billion out of this 22.7 billion, which is now being sought, is intended for major infrastructural projects.
That's correct.
And that's, of course, those projects will include railways, Mambila Power Project, TCN, which is transmission infrastructure, and so on. That's correct.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you also indicated that part of the borrowing plan involves support for state governments. Is that correct?
It's loans for state governments.
Loans?
Loans for state governments. So the state governments take loans, cannot take external loans directly, but through the federal governments. So we serve as guarantors for those loans. So the state governments service those loans.
Okay. But state loans rather form part of the quantum of 22.7 billion.
Yes.
Why is it that we haven't heard state governments talk about this? I mean since the story broke last week, it's all as if President Buhari wants to borrow 30 billion US dollars for the federal government. That's one leg of the issue that we'll discuss subsequently. But you have also indicated, and would like you to also clarify this, that this borrowing plan is not intended solely to fund the 2020 budget. Is that correct?
It is a 3-year borrowing plan.
All right.
It's not just to fund the 2020 budget. In fact, it's not addressing the deficit that is indicated in the 2020 budget.
So where have you got the reports wrong?
So is it between 2016 and
So the borrowing plan that was submitted was supposed to be for 2016 to 2018.
Okay.
But now we're resubmitting it. So now the projects, of course, will be current projects because it's only when the loan is approved and acquired before you now do the projects.
Okay, so let me again go back, because the question will then arise if this is so to speak, a representation of what had been presented and approved in part in 2016. Why was it not fully approved?
Well, in the wisdom of the 8th National Assembly, they decided to pick and select the projects that were approved. We had done our best at that time to ensure that this is done, but it didn't work out. If you recall, there was one particular loan for Kaduna State, for example, 350 million US dollars that is included in what we've resubmitted, was passed by the House of Reps and was not passed by the 8th Senate. But because it was not passed, now we have to restart the whole process all over again. The 8th National Assembly was selective. They have their own reasons, I guess. But these are projects that are important for the country to undertake. And we made the assessment and determined that these are still projects that are relevant and important and that needs to be done. And that's why we're submitting them.
Okay, Honorable Minister, I'll stay with you before we bring in the other guests. We're talking about debt to GDP. But the point has always been made that our challenge isn't necessarily with our debt profile, but rather with generating our capacity to generate more revenue. Are there issues or provisions in the finance bill that is being worked on by the National Assembly that will give us a bit of hope that, okay, 2020 going forward, our revenue profile will most likely increase, and therefore we'll now see a gradual reduction in our debt servicing burden?
So let me start by saying that in addition to the finance bill, there was also a PSE amendment that has now been passed by the National Assembly. At the minimum, we'll be getting at the minimum 1 billion US dollars from just that simple amendment. And the potential is it could be up to 2 billion US dollars. Some of the loopholes that we have closed by the amendments in the finance bill is going to block some of the leakages that we had in the past. We also have tried to create equity in amending some provisions that were detrimental to one sector in comparison to others. There's also the VAT increase, which for us at the federal government, the revenue that accrues is actually not very significant. But it's important for the states because the states are entitled to 85% of the VAT incremental revenue. So when we do these things, we do it to ensure that growth is national. We're not just looking at what the federal government alone can do, but also what the states need to do to contribute to the 7% growth that we aspire to.
Some of the projects that you have mentioned now are already being, partly financed by some, foreign, companies and all that, particularly the railway, for instance, in road infrastructure, transport infrastructure. Where are we, seeking this loan from?
Different agencies, different multilateral institutions. So we have loans from the World Bank, we have loans from the African Development Bank, Islamic Development Bank, German Development Agency, JICA, as well as the China Exim Bank. So it's from different multilateral, it's spread. Different multilateral institutions.
Okay, we'll return to that presently, Honorable Minister. Let's now bring in Dr. Emeka Okengo, one of our regular guests, Good Morning Nigeria, development economist and former World Bank consultant. You listen to the Honorable Minister. First, what's your reaction to what she has explained versus what we had read in the past?
Well, I think the Honorable Minister had made some pronouncements, and I think I want us to take it from there. And the first thing she said is that either we do this now or we're going to be paying the price later. The second thing she talked about was debt servicing and the struggle as a country we need to go through to now service debt. The third thing she talked about was ease of doing business and then why it is difficult for people to be able to do business in Nigeria. But nobody is tying this to what the main issues are, which is that what the Honorable Minister is saying is that if you do not produce, you cannot make money. If you do not make money, you cannot develop. And you see, for me, instead of using the word borrowing, I'd be more comfortable with calling it what it is, capital injection. Now, because you have people now, everybody comes on social media to say, oh, we're borrowing. And I said, okay, can we be able to now give a definition to what we call borrowing? It's a major instrument, finance instrument. When you talk about your grants, you talk about your equity, you talk about your debt, and all that. Now, what do banks do? How do banks survive? What are banks supposed to be to businesses? It is to lend money. Now, the government has come out to say, I've had this argument severally since I had my last start, and I say, oh, Dr. Kiongo, of all people, we didn't think that you'll be the one supporting government to borrow. And I said, my brother, of all people, I don't think you should be the one talking like this. More so, when we are stopped by a road. Have you ever bothered to find out? I mean, you're riding on a good road, you don't remember it's a road, but get into a bump. The first thing is, oh my God, what a horrible government. Just 1 minute of that road. Now, how are you going to be getting to where you're supposed to be going to if you are not now doing this capital injection? And I take it to where I've always argued that we should be going to. With a lot of respect to what government wants to do. If I were to say to government, these are my thoughts, I'll say no. Don't fall for this, let's be able to get what we can be able to get now. Madam mentioned JICA. JICA is a Japan fund. Japan's debt to their GDP is over 200%. Madam mentioned China. China's debt to their GDP is about 49%. America's debt to their GDP is about 89%. But can I give you news? Their productivity levels are quite stable because they have infrastructure that supports productivity. And instead of now having where you now talk only about debt servicing, you now have infrastructure that's actually now contributing, okay, to both productivity, okay, and their income and their revenues. Madam talked about revenue, to debt. How can you be able to get revenue to debt when you do not have infrastructure that can be able to help you do value processing, which you also mentioned? So, you see, I think we've gotten to a point in our country where, and again, I keep making this point, this debt, I think the Honorable Minister, might mention it, there were 63 billion, when this government took over. I stand to be corrected. As of 2014, the country's debt profile was standing at about $63 billion. So if you add probably what it is you have now, this present administration is probably going to be adding another first 18 and then this 22 that Madam has mentioned. But I do not even think that it is the volume of debt that should worry us. It is what plans do we have to be able to now get what you can call exclusive projects of government that can now run concurrently. She mentioned state governments taking loans, okay, and then federal government being able to fund them. What program do, because from what it is I've read about this particular thing, it is project-based, it is project-focused, okay? We are not going to be getting money and then start planning for what to do with it. But my worry as a development person would be, if what we are borrowing, or if what we are injecting, I rather use the word injecting, is not able to get these projects to the point of finish, to the point of engagement, wouldn't it be wiser that we now go, and as again, maybe on the last note, I don't take a lot of this time.
Wiser to do what?
Yes, wiser to be able to now, do a more thing through, to make certain that if we are talking about our rail infrastructure in Nigeria, it is costing us $1 trillion, $1 trillion naira. But if we are able to complete our rail projects, we might be able to now be moving load value at about 4 trillion. Okay, what would it cost us to be able to get our rails up and running, and then intermodal them with our minds, intermodal them with our funds, because you must be able to create, the off-taker or the primary services that these rails are going to be addressing.
Okay, Mr. Meka, let me just summarize what you've said, and I'd just like for you to, make clarification from all that you have said from the development point of view. Should we be worried about capital in taking money externally for our capital injection?
We should be grateful to our credit worthy. And can I tell you, the money we're talking about is the cheapest kind of funding you can get. I'm surprised that Nigeria got it. These are money that are supposed to be for least developed countries, and I think we're getting this money.
We're getting 1 to 2% interest rates, 5 years moratorium, long tenors of 20 to 25 years. This is money that, like you said, it's really very difficult to get. But Nigeria, because of our discipline in being able to service our debts, have maintained a reasonably high credit rating, and therefore we're still able to attract this.
And I'm sure you are
low-cost funding.
You are aware, you must have read in media since this borrowing plan was announced that, we are getting back into the old debt trap. This is not money to be borrowed from what we refer to in the past as the London and Paris Club, a team or a consortium of private lenders. Is that correct?
No. This is, I'll give you an example. We have Lagos to Kano Rail, about $5.5 billion from China Exim. This is a project that everybody will see that will employ a lot of Nigerians. There's also the railway modernization project, the Coastal Rail from between Port Harcourt and Lagos, $3.47 billion US. There's Mambila Power Project, $4.8 billion US. There's also some transmission projects for TCN to link different parts of the country to provide power. There's a project that we call the Greater Abuja Water Supply Project. These are large projects that people will see. They're tied to projects, and I think he mentioned a point whether this will finish the projects. These are projects that are costed, contracted and they're being funded completely by this facility.
Honorable Minister, I think again we should also, because you talked about being surety for states, governments that would want to take this loan. But are the loans that would be disbursed to the state governments, would they be tied to particular development plans?
There are also specific projects, specific project plans. We are guarantors. The states will be paying. We are guarantors, so we're taking some risk also. We're taking some liability. In the event that the state fails, we have to pay. But then we have access to their FAC. So that for us is a fallback. So if a state fails, we have access to their FAC and we can redeem them, whatever payments we need.
You trap them there, because that would be our source.
Well, that's why we're able to give a guarantee. Yes.
Okay, all right. We earlier indicated that Professor Kenife will be joining us via Skype from Owerri. You can see him on the right side of your screen. The lighting there doesn't appear quite bright. Professor Kenife, starting with you, you've listened to the explanation by the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning. Against the background of what we had read in the past, let's have your comments.
Yeah, I think let me begin by saying that why infrastructure? Infrastructure is a binding constraint to Nigerian economic development. Secondly, infrastructure is a key index of economic development worldwide. There's absolutely no question that Nigeria is wrestled to the ground by paucity of infrastructure. Now, the second dimension is, if you have infrastructure, you can attract investors. You can violate all benchmarks because you have infrastructure. And that's why Japan can get away with their debt to GDP of 223%. And then in South America, everybody getting away with it, 180%. Greece, they're all getting away with those simply because they have infrastructure. Then let's go to the law. The applicable law here is the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2007. And that act provides for, one, borrow externally for capital projects. That's what it says. Then, secondly, you only allowed one of the three major benchmarks. And the three benchmarks in borrowing is, one, debt to GDP. It places that, it should be 40%. That's global standard. Then, budget deficit to GDP is places it at 3%. Best benchmark is 5%. Even the eco currency, 4%. So we are doing really well on that. Government has not violated that in any way. Then the third important benchmark is debt service to government revenue. And that's why we have some challenges. But it is expected to be around 40%. But it is a moving target. The GDP is a moving target. Government revenue is a moving target. Our debt is a moving target. But ultimately, by the end of the day, even though you have spikes in those internal debt service, eventually it comes down to around that 40. Sometimes it goes to 60, it goes down to 45, but it does eventually come down. And that is because of the non-predictability in our revenue. And then the additional work needs to be done by the federal government in boosting internal revenue. I can see a lot of effort moving the tax base from 2 to 20 million to 35 million people. But we still need, and then raising the VAT is very small, but at least it is token. But it shows that we are determined to move. But then we must address federal FRA. FRA is where 122 MDAs must record to account, because they should be giving us 80% of the operating surplus every month and not wait for 1 year and give us creative accounting. Now let's get to the subject matter of the debt. I expect, please, the debt DG to help the minister and save our president any embarrassment at the House by scrutinizing the loan in a way, not by removing anything, but just scrutinizing it, because you do a debt sustainability test and just review that debt of sustainability that was done in 2016, just to ensure
that we don't get any embarrassment at the house. But then the major thing is this: I am actually surprised that Nigeria is actually getting concessionary loans. We are no longer eligible for this. In 2016, yes, because our GDP was 300 or something, and our GDP per capita was way below 2,000. Now it's way ahead of 2,000, with a GDP of $468 billion, which is 143 trillion, and our population is 202. We are way above $2,000. So I don't know how the minister managed to get this back on board, because we are not eligible to get this rate. Then this rate, you look at integrity, this rate is very important, very low, concessionary between 1% and 2% at the most. Long gestation period projects is accommodated by the long moratorium given for many of these projects. And then the repayment time is extended. Some of them are 25 years, 15 years. So there's no way we will not go for this money. We do need it because it's cheaper. It's far cheaper. And if you look at strategy, our debt strategy says rebalance our debt, external and domestic, in favor of external. Bring down domestic from 79% to 60% and bring up external from 19% to 40%. The reasons are not far-fetched. Immediately, there's a gain of 168 billion just by rebalancing. Secondly, we need to move away gradually from bilateral loans and some of the bonds that are 8.7%, 7.8%, and go to low concessionary ones where you have so much latitude and more impetus. But more importantly, the people you are taking this money from, multilateral finance development institution, are not going to just give you the money. They will give you the money, they will follow you bumper to bumper, they will monitor it because they know and they want to make sure that it complies with the law. So there's no such thing as free breakfast in this borrowing plan. So I heavily support this plan, and I think it's the right thing to do, and I think the minister is doing the correct thing, and we need to support her to ensure that this country builds the necessary infrastructure to unlock the potentials in our economy.
Professor Kelife, of course, a development economist. Thank you. Joining us via Skype from Owerri. Ajuri Ngelale.
We'll still return to Prof, I believe. We are not signing
him off.
Definitely.
No, we're not signing him off. Ajuri Ngelale is the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Public Affairs. He also is joining us via Skype from Uyo, and there you'll see him. Ajuri, now, the view of those who are somehow apprehensive about this loan is that, see, we as Nigeria have been borrowing, since 2016, but in their words, we have little to show for it. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, let me just say good morning to you, Claire, to Kingsley, to the distinguished members of the panel, and also to Nigerians. First of all, let's acknowledge that that's verifiably false, right? I mean, anybody who is living in the southwestern axis of this country, for example, would be able to identify the very tangible effect of some of those loans in the Lagos-Ibadan rail line, for example, which is getting in a few months. That's obviously going to decongest Apa and all of that. I think Lagosians and people living along within Abeokuta, Ibadan are seeing the effects of that project, and that's just one. Obviously, we have done quite a bit of work with the borrowings that were taken out before, and that should give a lot of confidence to Nigerians that indeed, when we now take out this fresh batch, that we're going to be able to commence much more work that's going to have direct benefit on their living standards. And I want to be very specific about something. The Honorable Minister of Finance mentioned some of the legislative interventions that have been made. But I think one of the things that we should all take into account is the historical context in which we now find ourselves as it relates to why it is that there's this tremendous urgency to get money and to get these projects on the ground as soon as possible. We all know that the African continent, the nation states across the continent have signed on to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. we also know that that is going to bring in excess of about $1 trillion into African economies across the continent. We also know that we have obviously the largest market, but that does not.
It appears we have a glitch there with the Skype connection.
What we're going to make is we need to help industry to be competitive.
Yes.
Otherwise, we will not be reaping a lot of that $1 trillion trade that is going to come into Africa. We need to make sure we have significant infrastructure built out so that businesses can thrive and be able to compete with other products from within the continent.
Oh, okay, I mean, while we try to clear up the connection from Uyo for Ajuri to continue his contribution, let's return to the Honorable Minister of Finance. One of the points raised by Professor Ken Ife, there's also another raised by Dr. Okengo, which I would like you to address, has to do with the revenue side of our plan. Now, he says, and this has been a major sticking point, that there are revenue generating agencies that are supposed to transfer a sizable percentage, I'm saying 80, I wouldn't know what the percentage is now, of their operating surplus into the national coffers. But this is done on a periodic basis, in this case annually, and he's mentioned what is referred to as creative accounting in the surpluses that they are supposed to transfer to the coffers. He suggested, couldn't this be done, say, on a monthly basis or otherwise done quarterly, so that there is, almost real-time tracking of what they are supposed to bring in, rather than wait on an annual basis for them to get, the luxury, as it were, of remitting to the national coffers what they deem to be their operating surplus.
So we've done a number of things, and we are already seeing improvements from the measures that we've taken. In 3 years ago, 2017, the total performance of revenue generating agencies was about 25%, and in terms of operating surplus. Last year, it moved up to about 40%. By half year, 2019, we're at about 54%. What have we done? We're continuously tracking the performance of the revenue generating agencies. We've asked that their remittances should be done quarterly. The President has given directive, which has been circulated, that they must remit what they budgeted as operating surplus quarterly. Or if they have done their management account, they remit based on the management account. And where any agency fails to remit, the Accountant General is authorized to go into their revenue and take the equivalent of what is in their projected revenue budget. The President has also put in place a presidential monitoring and revenue reconciliation committee. So this committee has reconciled all our revenues from 1999 to date, and right now they do monthly reconciliations. What this reconciliation is doing is identifying the revenues, blocking the dysfunctionality that we had before. If you ask for a particular tax, one agency reports one figure, another one reports a different figure, and they're supposed to have the same numbers. So we're reconciling on a monthly basis. We're tracking the performance. The President has made us ministers to sign to key performance indicators. So we have deliverables that were being measured by, and then we have cascaded those deliverables to the various agencies that are under each, not just the Ministry of Finance, under each ministry. So there's close monitoring now of revenue. We are putting in place now a portal that the revenue agencies send their information onto, so we have a more current view of the performance of the revenues.
Okay, let me bring Dr. Kungu here, because I look at it from the people's point of view, and I'm wondering if, from all that the minister had said, and you and Prof had explained, and government has continuously tried to explain the reason for these loans and the use to which they will be put. Why are Nigerians still not getting it? Why are they still contesting or querying the motive?
Well, I digress and give you one very simple balance that has created a lot of very false perceptions. He who goes are borrowing, goes are sorrowing. it is something that is age-long. But it's not a very true statement. Okay? Because you need debt to be able to grow your business. There is no person who does business that does not borrow. It should have been who borrows, party goes borrowing. And this is what has happened to our country. What we've done is that we've borrowed money, and this is where Kingsley was saying, from what you call venture capitalists, who now come together and say, okay, we can be able to do this and do that and do that. The minister also mentioned one very particular area, which is the mining sector. Between 1965 and 1974, the mining sector was contributing 12% to the GDP of this country. Okay? Actually led to the establishment of power plants, one which is still up and running till today in Jos. Led to the establishment of the only functional smelter, still the biggest in Africa 40 years after it stopped functioning, which is the Mekari smelting plant. But what has happened is that because we've not been able to now develop the proper infrastructure, and I'm bringing it to the citizens now. At that point in time that the mining sector was putting 12% to the GDP, it was employing practically everybody. For those of us who grew up in the north, it was the mining sector that got all of us here. In fact, nobody in our time knew who was a Muslim, who was a Christian during Salah. All we needed to do was land in one of our largest houses. A tailor comes, takes all our measurements, and you saw us walking the streets of Jos as family. There were no riots. There were no crises. Everybody was a citizen of the plateau. Why? Because everybody had a job in the mines. And it came with also the allied infrastructure. I think what has happened is that because we've not been able to probably do a lot of citizen engagement, people now find it a lot easier to be able to tell you the things you want to know. And this is why I think that government must look at Voice of Nigeria and Radio Nigeria again. Clearly, when we were growing up, we used to see cinemas. If you can recollect, government would bring in drive-in trucks to villages. There were a lot of townhouses. People were informed directly by the agencies of government that needed to inform them, not about politics, but about the issues of development. So I think what we also need to do, and I think at the level of the minister, when she was in Haiti, she left her mark there, so when you were talking about process, I was waiting for the answer that you got, because she changed the rules of the game when she was in Haiti, and of course there was a lot of confrontation. So I think what we need to do as a country, first and foremost, and this is for people in government, is to build a country, like she says, where everybody understands to their extent, level of understanding, what everybody needs to understand about development. And that if you do not have infrastructure, even if you have the best of lands, and where Kingsley comes from in Edo, there's a community that produces all the food. They can't even bring it to the market because there are no roads. So infrastructure is key.
You are not referring to my community, by the way.
Why you are still? Because I'm actually thinking of the issue of accountability in terms of spending.
You see, it is the citizens that demand accountability. Trust me, Madam in her office can do so much. But the moment you get citizens involved in understanding what government wants to do, and this is where sacrifice comes in. This is what we should be pushing to. If somebody wants, I was here in one of your programs, and then somebody was saying, oh, don't toll the roads. Why are you putting toll on the roads? The same people now go and be taking photographs of the same roads, and they're putting on social media to say this government is doing nothing. Where are they going to get the money? Government says they want to borrow money to build infrastructure. The same people are now running to say, oh, don't put us in a debt trap, when they don't even understand, the difference between, like I said, borrowing to go as borrowing and borrowing as capital injection.
All right, Emeka Okengu, thank you very much for your explanation. But amongst the issues that you have also raised now in your latest contribution has to do with public information management, which is why we're returning to Ajuru Ngilale. We understand that the connection is clearer now. You saw him on the screen a while ago. Ajuru, if you can hear me, I would like you to respond to this. There appears to have been some miscommunication of this borrowing plan? Because until the Honorable Minister came into our studios this morning and laid it bare, it seemed as if it was President Muhammad Buhari was going to borrow this money,
a new one,
according to the views, almost heedlessly as to the consequences for everybody. But from the explanation that we have heard, this is not just a federal government borrowing plan, but a national borrowing plan. So what happened? And in terms of the numbers, that this is just a resubmission of an earlier submission, part of which was previously approved.
Thank you very much, Kingsley. First of all, I think we've been very clear from the outset. You know, all week long, I've been on various media, radio stations around the country, etc., explaining the technicalities of not only debt situation, revenue situation, but also details of what is involved in this infrastructure package. Is that the initial $10. We do know that the 8th National Assembly approved some select projects from that initial submission, obviously including the Lagos-Ibadan rail line borrowing, for example. So, indeed, there is about $22 billion remaining. Now, the issue moving forward is about ensuring that our people know exactly what it is that is in store for them. Because ultimately, you know, we've heard borrowings from here, borrowings from there. Obviously, we know that in from 2010, we had $35 billion in national debt. And obviously, by 2014, it was $67 billion, almost double at a time of high oil revenues, and people didn't see any infrastructure. So when that is the background, if that is your history, then ultimately, when you now ask for new borrowing, Nigerians are very naturally going to be very skeptical. But what we're asking Nigerians is to say, look, from the time that we initially started borrowing under this administration, President Muhammadu Buhari, you have seen the results. You have seen the Lagos-Ibadan rail line that's going to be commissioned soon. You have seen airports around the country where we're now finding out previous loans were being diverted into private accounts. You're now seeing Mr. President come in with special interventions. He's finishing these airports and releasing new money where necessary just to complete some of these previous arrangements. Now, moving forward, I want to get into the details of some of the things that have not been touched on in terms of this package. First of all, within the $22 billion that's remaining that we're now seeking approval for,
I think still having a slight glitches with connection from Uyo. Well, let's bring in Professor Ken Ife, who is in our via Skype. Prof, we just asked a question. If Prof is still with us, Prof, we asked a question about, public awareness, of the facts of this external borrowing, because as we said earlier, we started off by saying, given a figure, which the minister has come to, clarify that no, the figure is not about $30 billion, but rather about 22 point something billion dollars that we're asking for. And I'm saying, do we have an issue of probably, information getting out to the people, the right information getting out to the people? And is there an issue of accountability also in spending some of these loans that we seek?
There is absolutely no doubt that there is information asymmetry. And the public is a major stakeholder in this project, because once bitten, twice shy. They've had it up to here in 2005, when Nigeria nearly collapsed and everything went out of order, and we were facing severe fiscal stress in 2005. Then we had debt forgiveness of 18 billion, and then we paid 12 billion, and that brought down the thing to about 15% debt to GDP ratio. That memory is not short-lived. People remember those. So it's very important that they are carried along. But let me tell you, the first job that needs to be done is for the National Assembly to go and complete the benchmark. Because the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2007 simply set the borrowing deficit to GDP at 3%. But they now left the Assembly to set the external debt, which they should do at 40%, to set the internal debt, the domestic debt to GDP, external debt to GDP, and also the other debt parameters. They have to do this, because we now have a ninth assembly that is working well with the executive. So they should get this out of the way, and that will reduce the tension. People know when we are crossing the line and all of that. And I have to also tell you that even if you add this 22 billion being sought to the 70 something, it's still less than $100 billion. And the whole, compared to 468 billion GDP, is about 20%. So we still way half of what the benchmark ought to be. But having said that, I'm in support of moving this whole agenda forward, because the beneficiary and the ultimate beneficiary is the Nigerian people. But they have to up the game in communication. I'm here in Owerri, just on communication of central bank policies to all the media houses. And that is just how important it is, that because we are having robust advances in all fronts, we need to carry the media along with us. We need to carry the people along with us. So I cannot underemphasize the necessity to inform the public, and I think I have mentioned that to the minister before. It's very important. Advocacy, communication strategy must be on top of this game, because it's not just what you do, it's how you do it and how much people are aware of what we are doing.
Professor Kenife, we'd like to thank you very much there for your views. Unfortunately, Ajuri, we lost him a while ago. We hope that we're able to get him back on. Otherwise, we'd like to thank him for being with us. Ajuri Ngelale joining us via Skype from Uyo. We'll take a short break now. There are a number of tweets that have come in. We'll take a look at those tweets and then return to our guests. Honorable Minister of Finance, studio here in Abuja, along with Emeka Okengo and Professor Kenife, still with us via Skype in Owerri.
All right, thank you for joining us, for staying tuned. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria. Time for tweets. And Ibrahim Modu Aji tweets, if you borrow and still don't use it judiciously, then this is where the problem is. You may borrow, but use it wisely. Spend on what it was intended for.
Festus Akimboyewa, it's either borrowing or removal of oil subsidy. For us to develop like other countries, we have to borrow massively for human capital development and key infrastructure. Singapore and Malaysia are Commonwealth countries that are doing well, but their debts are over 200% of their GDP. That's the claim here.
Yes, all right. Francis Obi tweets, I do not have any objection to federal government's external borrowing, but the funds should be judiciously utilized to move the economy forward and reduce poverty. My priority areas are electricity, roads, and then hospitals.
Bashir, the concern is, how does the government ensure that the projects do not become abandoned and thus uncompleted after it leaves office?
And Pen prays, borrowing is not bad, but investing the borrowed fund is our problem. Government should borrow to enrich individuals, but to improve the economy that will enrich all.
Festus Akimboyewa again will take this one because it's a different perspective from him. He says the federal government should allow the private sector to invest in our key infrastructure, because there are pots of money in the private sector that government can tap into as an alternative to borrowing.
And Mohammed Kabina tweets, borrowing is good as long as it will be used for capital expenditure. To borrow and pay salary is bad for an economy. Lagos today is the highest indebted state in Nigeria, and it is the richest by far.
Mike Ayankwo, I'm going to summarize this. Says borrowing is an important tool in economic development. No country of the world is averse to borrowing. The concern in Nigeria is what was done with previous borrowings and the rising debt portfolio. What is our debt management office doing in this regard? How much is our total debt portfolio as at date? And what is the interest element? The Honorable Minister has already spoken to some of these issues.
All right. Law Alpha C. Federal government policy of external borrowing was to tackle infrastructure deficit across the country. But from the look of things, other sectors will now have to be looked into, even recurrent expenditure.
Solomon, that is the largest legally and contractually, that's the most significant legally and contractually binding obligation of every government. As such, governments at all levels must use external borrowing plan to boost non-oil sources of revenue, since crude oil sales make up nearly 90% of foreign exchange. This is the only way to pay back debts.
And Otulo Sunday tweets, Nigerians have a huge apprehension when it comes to borrowing because of the misappropriations in the past. To him, this loan should be in form of concession for infrastructures.
Now, Titus Monday Knock, when you borrow and you are unable to pay, you mortgage the future of generations unborn. I hope that government has set aside modalities for repayment because looters are bound in the system and will jump at the slightest opportunity to avail them.
All right, and this is Omogbola Obabs. Countries world over go for borrowings for developmental purposes. Purpose for these loans must be to revamp the infrastructural decay of many years of the past. We must ensure such funds are properly monitored to ensure they are directed at the targeted projects, not diverted.
Well, we're going to read this briefly from Dele Jack Solomon again. It says, if we must borrow to fund the 2020 budget, and enhance competitiveness and ensure social inclusion, then President Buhari must supervise the allocation of funds and execution of projects. The minister has already indicated that this borrowing plan is not to fund the deficit of the 2020 budget. That's correct, Minister? Okay.
All right, Jones Ferrari. I don't see anything bad if you borrow and accountably use the funds. Borrowing and looting is the thing we need to deal with, since the current administration says they block loopholes for corruption. Our debt service is expected to improve.
Mustafa Harazimi, sincerely speaking, I don't know the reason behind this borrowing. I'm sure if you have been watching this program, you would have found the number of, or heard a number of reasons why the government is borrowing. What it says is it's better to manage our income instead of borrowing. How do you generate more income?
All right, Ugu Clement, the problem is not borrowing, but to make sure that it is used for infrastructure, not ending up into the private pockets.
Short and sharp, this one from Malik. If only the money will be used appropriately.
And Akejo Alagbajo, it's difficult for a nation to attain developmental status without borrowing, but it shouldn't cascade to using substantial part of our budget to service loan. Exactly 13 years ago, we left Paris Club and other multilateral loans. Can we really have alternative to borrowing?
Well, those are some of the questions that our guests have been answering this morning. These are low interest, very low interest concessionary loans to which ordinarily a country like Nigeria, which is a middle income country, is not entitled. Mohammed Mustafa, is it that the funds generated by our generating agencies are not enough for the country, that we have to borrow and keep hearing billions of naira being generated by customs, FIRS, and so on? Again, these are issues that the Honorable Minister has addressed. Claire, one issue that came up in the tweet, and I actually noted it down here. The Minister says, look, yes, low interest loans that we are taking and a 5-year moratorium. Okengo, tell us something. We know from our records, from our history, that project implementation can sometimes be a challenge. So before you know it, you get into that 5 years, and then 5 years are supposed to give you enough time for you to finish the project and then get on. What can we do in the current circumstance to obviate those usual challenges that hamper project execution and implementation in our country?
Well, if I had the Honorable Minister, he says this is going to be end-to-end. And I think there's something that's emerging in Nigeria now. I think we're beginning to evolve this culture of you do crime, you do time. It's beginning to get very obvious that it is no longer business as usual. Okay, you no longer pop champagne or buy a new car or do something and then you expect to get away with it. You know, as draconian as it sounds, you even see custom, people now going to hotels, to tow people's cars. And then they say to you, you need to tell us how this came about. So I think there's a new Nigeria that's emerging, but it's emerging at a cost. And this cost is the heat you and I who are at the lower level are beginning to feel. But I think that for me, my charge to government will be, there is an area that government must look at. And it is that area, when people tell me that Lagos is the richest state in Nigeria, I tell them that Yobe is the richest state in Nigeria. Yobe is the richest state in Nigeria because Yobe has 900 million metric tons of bentonic clay. I keep saying this. All you need to do is to be able to begin to value process that thing. Yobe would have become like any Lagos, would have become like any Dubai. Zamfara is not a poor state. Kano, where the Honorable Minister comes from, has a mine they call Ririwe mines. Ririwe has one of the biggest deposits of tin ore on earth. The mine was abandoned in the 40s. So until we begin to look at what can be able to now get our citizens. What we keep talking about, debt to revenue. We keep talking about expanding the tax net. Okay, now the question becomes, if we are doing pay as you earn, are you going to be vomiting your blood to pay tax? You must have a job to be able to pay. You must be engaged. And government says we are not in this business of, employing people. What we want to do is to be able to put into perspective the framework, the policy, the environment for the private sector to thrive. So my point is that part of what can also now happen about this, our attitude, is that we've always had very strong men. In Igbo land at one time, Kingsley, we started using jibs to give cola. It became, and then people started taking titles. In Igbo, it's called Okwotekeneze. You're not supposed to stand up to greet the king. But if you bring a jeep as cola, you can actually stand up and give him 3. I'm telling you, it happened in this country. But now we are beginning to reverse, ditto for even the people in the north too. But the disconnect between the citizenry and those in governance has to be, okay, fine, you're building infrastructure. They see it as aesthetics, okay, if they are not going to be part of it. How they can be part of it is that government must be able to now look at those sectors that can engage people. It is not enough to give somebody hoe and a knife. How many people, like each time we have a conversation, know that the best touches for pharmacy comes from the mining and the agriculture sector, from yam and kaolin. Now, if you had people, if you had cooperatives that were entering into this thing, you can actually now leave people out of poverty. That's what the problem is.
You see, Emeka Okengo, thanks. Claire and I were on set yesterday. We were discussing, our guests were discussing climate change. And we again went down to the role of the subnational entities. Yes. How much they understand what their responsibility is and how well they are keying into that, whether greening the environment or otherwise. Now, this point we're just talking about now, getting it down to the grassroots, the federal government is not the one that is going to be planting crops. Are you with me? Which brings us to a question I would like to ask Claire of Professor Ken Ife. Professor Ken Ife, if you are still with us via Skype, look, all of this that we're talking about, from your perspective, how much understanding is there at the subnational level as to the value of this borrowing, and therefore how state governments, other than what they are asking for, can key in so that the real value now translates into a catalyst for economic development, revenue generation, and wealth creation?
Excellent. Now let me tell you this. At the crux of the matter are serious questions of integrity, validity, and sustainability of the borrowing. And let me tell you where this comes up. Now, I wrote in 2005, when the whole debt forgiveness was raging, I wrote a petition to Tony Blair in London through my member of parliament. I was questioning why the debt was given to the military juntas. The military juntas refused to pay some of the loan, and then 40% of the debt are now penalties. And then I said electorates in Nigeria and electorates in UK are questioning why you can't defend the integrity of this debt, you can't defend the validity of the debt, nor the sustainability. Explain to me how World Bank project that was to build a hospital somewhere in Southeast and build 68 kilometers of road somewhere in Southeast, payments were made and no road, no hospital was found. It became a scandal. I persecuted, I followed with the development ODA minister, I followed Tony Blair actually, minister wrote back to me because they went to this Paris club, and my final suggestion was this: forgive this debt for Nigeria, but make it a condition that they should spend it on sustainable development goal or millennium development goal. And he wrote me back to say, excellent, that they liked the idea and they took it to Paris club and it was accepted. This same question haunts us today. And the reason why I want us to move away to multilateral institution is because they have learned their lesson. They look at the law book to see what is eligible to be loaned. They also know that there will be outcry if they don't enforce a strong regime of monitoring and evaluation. So they are concerned, as much as we are concerned, where the money they are putting in is going to go. So that's why they're going to follow this bumper to bumper. And that's why, and then not even to talk about the fact that there are concessionary rates for a longer gestation period, for all sorts of things, superior to what is going on with bilateral lending and bonds and all of that. So that's why I say that I'm happy with this.
Oh dear. Oh dear, we lost again, Professor Ken Ife. Okay. Prof, if we... okay, we want to thank you, Professor Ken Ife, for your contribution. We're sorry. Okay, you're back. Thank you very much, Professor Nike. Let's put you on a hold for now and bring in the Honorable Minister. As a citizen, usually when loans of this nature are sought externally, the concern is that the fiscal and probably monetary measures that might be put in place, for servicing some of these to get some money to service the loans, tend to, trigger high cost of living, and the people get to, bear the brunt.
Well,
yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So in this case now, that is the worry, and that is the concern of many Nigerians. So how can you assure Nigerians that, look, you're not going to feel any pain from this? This is basically for developmental issues, and you will be the, better for it.
Well, let me just, because some of the tweets, a lot of the tweets that you read had concerns around accountability. Let me just assure the Nigerian public that this government is accountable, and that these loans we're taking, they're very much tied to the project. And we're structuring these loans to make sure there is inbuilt monitoring mechanism. So you have to perform a certain level before you get disbursements. Right now, to access funds from the World Bank is like passing through the eye of a needle. You have to meet so many conditions, including they are also monitoring the projects. The Chinese loans are delivered by the Chinese companies that are contracted to build out the roads, the rails themselves. These are loans that will be employing a large number of people. So the impact will be almost instant. The moment funds are disbursed, you have people engaged. We also have targets that we must meet, commitments that the President has made to the citizens to deliver on these projects. We have a responsibility to make sure that the funds are used strictly for the projects and that they're delivered on time. There will be no abandoned projects because the fund is assured once you sign the loan. Most of the projects that are abandoned, they're not project-tied loans. They're projects that have been put in government budgets that over the years have not performed.
Been funded.
Sorry, Kingsley, you talk about what we must as a country meet, for instance, to access the loan from the World Bank. What are some of those things that we must meet?
Well, they like Professor Ken said, they also look at all our laws to make sure that the loans they are providing are not contravening any laws, especially the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the Procurement Act. And when we borrow, it is also based on contracts that will have been entered for delivery of a particular project. So they also make sure that the contract terms that we commit to are also adhered to. The contracts have deliveries. You must do A to B before you get a tranche. So you don't get all the money. You draw as the projects progress. So the money is not going to, in fact, this debt is not going to crystallize in one day. We recognize the debt as we draw. And we did our debt sustainability analysis before resubmitting to the National Assembly. So this will still be contained within the fiscal limits that has been set for us.
Yeah, just to take us back, this is by way of summary now, to the point made by Dr. Emeka Okengo earlier, when he was talking about the linkages. Now, assuming this is, shall we just say loosely, the first phase of our borrowing plan to expand and reinforce our infrastructure. It was talking about, let's say, rail. It was talking about the spurs. If you have Lagos, Kano, that's a virtual straight line. What about the spurs that will take you to the farm gates, take you to the mining sites where you can now have other linkages with others? That's intermodality. That apparently is not on the cards, and perhaps that will come in phase 2. What then would also be the role of the subnational entities? Look, let's face it, the federal government cannot build every road, the federal government cannot build every rail track.
Well, the federal government will be building the rail tracks. And then talking about investments, when we build, we will now be able to have the rail lines being taken over by the private sector. That is the rolling stock. Just like you have in the UK, the UK government own the lines and then the rolling stock are owned by the private sector. So this will enhance private sector investment. The president has said build the major access roads and build sports at least in the second phase to every state. So there will be more of such loans, but they are loans to build major infrastructure.
All right, Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, thank you very much for joining us on Good Morning Nigeria. Dr. Emeka Kungu, Development Economist and former World Bank Consultant, thank you. And of course, Professor Kenife, a Development Economist who joined us via Skype from Owerri. Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much. And earlier on, we had signed off a jury. All right, thank you for watching. That's Good Morning Nigeria. But just before we say goodbye, let's take a look at sports.
Enugu Rangers, one of Nigeria's two representatives in the 2019-2020